He and Carol spent some years on the LBJ Ranch in Texas as volunteer guides, you could say. And so part of this show that we have is an artist from Portland who has depicted presidents, and she's got one over there of JFK and of Lincoln and LBJ. And so actually it was Mike Koloski. Where's his? Is he out of town?
I don't know.
But it was his suggestion. He said, well, you know, Dick, spend all that time out there. Let's talk about LBJ. And Mike's a big kind of one of these conflicted fans of LBJ.
Sorry.
That's all right.
He's beginning to have these flashes now.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll let Dick start off with the program, and then we hope to continue with the discussion of that presidency. Okay? Dick Burch.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, first, tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing today is, well, Carol and I, when I retired in 1994, we decided to go ahead and move out of our house. We sold our house and moved into a large motorhome, a bus conversion, because we wanted to travel all around the country. And we didn't want to leave our house vacant. We definitely did not want to rent it out. So we decided that we wanted to do something besides just travel. So we got this idea, because we had this long, and still have this long-standing love affair with our national parks. And so we decided that we wanted to volunteer at national parks. Well, we came across, as a result of some recommendations, Lyndon B. Johnson National Historic Park in Johnson City. We had heard that that was a good park, that they needed volunteers, and they really treated their volunteers right. So when we first went to the park to volunteer, Carol, my wife Carol, was sitting in the back there. It was a no-brainer. She could be used because of all of her library experience in the LBJ library within the park. In my situation, it wasn't quite so obvious, but they saw that I was driving this bus, and they decided that maybe he can drive a bus and talk too. So I was recruited, and I guess I probably the only volunteer that conducted bus tours at the LBJ Ranch. Is there anyone here who has visited the LBJ National Historic Park? No one? Okay. Well then, anything that I say, you can't dispute, right?
Carol.
Oh, Carol. Yeah, why did you come here? To keep me honest. Well, it was pretty interesting. We actually started in the LBJ State Park, just across the Pedernales River from the National Park, or that part of the National Park. But the headquarters of the LBJ National Historic Park, which was established in 1969, was as a result of LBJ donating a whole bunch of land, mostly the LBJ Ranch. About 2/3 of the ranch was donated by LBJ. And one can speculate or maybe even debate, why would someone donate 2/3 of his ranch? Well, there are a lot of explanations. I'm convinced the real reason was he wanted to control a little bit about the history that was told about this very colorful 36th president of the United States. When we started the tours, just before we started the tours, all of the guests, the visitors to the park, were shown a video, and I have that video, and I'm going to show you this historic video from way back when. All I have to do is press the right button, and we'll get started with this. And then after this video, I'm going to take you on a, well, somewhat of a tour of the LBJ Ranch. And it's coming very slowly. These projectors start And so this was a special broadcast in 1966. Ray Shearer was the NBC narrator. And there is a bit of a delay after this until the video actually gets started.
I don't think it's going yet.
Yeah, it is.
He said it was slow.
Yeah, it's still going. It just looks like it's not.
Oh,
The official home of the President of the United States is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. Here, during his term of office, he lives and works and finds his place in history. But no president has called this place home. Not Lyndon Johnson. Not the 34 men who came before him. In the loneliness of this place, with the power and burden of the office, Lyndon Johnson lives as President of the United States. But when the chance comes for a few days' rest, to refresh his spirit, to renew his strength, Lyndon Johnson goes back to the place of his roots, to the people and land he has known and been a part of all of his life. The President goes home. Home for Lyndon Johnson is a narrow strip of land running across south central Texas. It stretches from the state capital in Austin to the town of Fredericksburg, 80 miles to the west. Its people call it the Hill Country. A land of big skies and long horizons, and of a river called the Burch. This is the Texas of Lyndon Baines Johnson.
This is the ranch. Since 1951, the President and his family have lived here. Since 1963, most of the great figures of the world have visited here. But most often, it has been the place where the President comes, the land he loves. This is home. When visitors come, the President often takes them on a tour in his car and shows them the ranch and the surrounding countryside. These occasions are relaxed and informal. The President likes to tell his visitors about the land, some of its history, what it was like when he was a boy, and what it has meant to him.
The President enjoys startling his guests by going across the underwater road on the dam a few hundred yards below the ranch house.
My first memory is on the banks of this river. I remember running down and putting my feet in the water and watching the fish when I was 4 years old. And I raced horses up, down its slopes. And these are the scenes of my childhood, so to speak. And I feel comfortable here. I'm at home here.
As he talked, his thoughts went back to that time in history when his forebears first came to the Hill Country.
My grandfather was brought up in Georgia, he and his brother came here in the very early 50s. They were orphan boys. They came and kept in Story and located down here at Lockhart near Austin. And then they migrated up here to the hills and started driving cattle up the trail to Abilene, Kansas, the old Chisholm Trail. But they would bring cattle from far west as Fredericksburg, far east as Austin, far south as San Marcos, far north as Llano. They would assemble them there and then drive them up the trail. And that's where they put on their stakes. And that's where they've all stayed since. This is the original plot where Johnson City was first settled. This is the original ranch headquarters. Under those trees there is the first log cabin that was built in this entire section of the state.
Another important landmark in the history of the Johnson family lies only a few miles west of Johnson City.
This is the house where we lived before we moved to Johnson City, the house where I was born.
How many were there in your family? Were you the...
7, 5 children, mother and father. I was the oldest. We spent a lot of time on this board. It's the coolest place in the summertime. I bet it is. There's the old lantern, the rawhide chair. Let's go in and look at it. Yes, this is the room where I was born. They tell me that I was born before the doctor arrived with the assistance of my grandmother and some neighboring women. I think that was fairly common in those days. That's the bed that I was born in. My grandmother Baines made that quilt, gave it to us. This is the sitting room. That's the first picture.
That was taken, what, 3 months?
6 months. Here it is, and I sent it to my grandmother. Here's my mother's writing. Age 6 months, height 29 inches, weight 23 pounds, disposition angelic. To my precious little grandmama, Lyndon Bain. I send you this, and love packed in a kiss.
Who was it that characterized you as angelic?
Oh, yeah. It was my mother.
Oh, I see.
My mother was doing the writing.
What is your first memory of this house, Mr. President?
Standing in front of that pump, my mother crying, my daddy was working after midnight, she was afraid to stay here at home. I held the lamp there while she pumped the water, and I remember she was crying, said she was frightened. I told her I'd take care of her.
What do you remember about growing up here?
Well, I remember riding this pasture from daylight until dark every day, every summer, from the time I was 8 or 9 years old until I finished high school. I remember seeing the goats scrambling to eat the leaves off the small shrubs and trees. It always fascinated me to see a goat climb to the top of a tree to get the last green leaf. I remember seeing the deer run through the oak trees, jump the fences. I remember seeing the sheep with their little lamb grazing on the countryside. I remember seeing the beautiful white-faced cattle graze in the lowlands, the fertile valleys, and particularly the prairie country.
These cattle all look very trusting in you.
They're young and innocent, right?
Sir?
They're still young and innocent. My mother used to build me from that house about when I was 4 years old, afraid I'd get in this river, drown. lead me down there and turned me over to the teacher at the side door. I remember sitting in the teacher's lap, I remember reading aloud, I remember standing and reciting poems, I remember spelling. They gave out words, we'd have a line. When we miss a word, but we'd have to get out of the line, sit down. That you? Go ahead. My father used to wake me up. Sometimes that sun come up and say, "Get up, Lyndon, every boy in town's already got an hour start on you, you never will catch up." I'll get up in the morning, milk, feed the horses, get my lunch in my lunch bucket, walk 4 miles to school.
Perhaps no one knows the details of the president's early years there better than the museum hostess, Mrs. Jessie Hunter.
This house, a typical Texas farmhouse, was built in 1886. When the Johnsons acquired it in 1913 and moved here from Stonewall, there were 3 children, Lyndon Baines, Rebecca, and Josephy. This was bought when the Johnsons lived here, and most of the furniture is original Johnson furniture. These pictures are of the president's parents, Rebecca Baines Johnson and Sammy D. Johnson, Jr. These are pictures of the president and his family. This picture of the president was made when he was 18 months old. This was when he was 5 years old. It was taken on the front steps of this house. When he was 13 years old, in his first pair of long trousers. And when he was 15, the year he graduated from Johnson City High School.
When we finished high school in May 1924, there was no work in Johnson City, so 6 of us acquired a T-model Ford. We went west to seek our fortune. Most of my work was a cafe and washing cars, and finally as an elevator boy in flat building in San Bernardino, and then I spent some time in the lawyer's office in San Bernardino. I came back here in 1926 after almost 2 years in California, and worked on this road across the river there for more than a year, driving a truck and running a bulldozer. And there were long days. We'd start at daylight, we'd finish at dark. The pay was $1 a day, and the work was very rough and difficult. So Mother kept urging me to go to school, and finally one Sunday I started into college. I started out working on campus digging rocks, and I was a janitor. I did some painting, old buildings and garages, where I slept in the attic. I sold real silk socks whenever I could spare an extra hour. It was my junior year and senior year. I edited the newspaper, college newspaper, for 2 years, received $30 a month doing that. And I was available for employment those days. But I wound up with several $100 in the bank with my diploma, my permanent teacher's certificate, a BS degree. But I never worked so hard in all my life as I worked my senior year, before or since. One of Mr. Clayburg's representatives called me up. I had campaigned for Mr. Clayburg's son in this congressional district. He was a candidate for Congress to succeed a Republican. So he asked me to join him as his assistant to go to Washington. I thought it over and decided I'd like very much to do so. And so I joined Mr. Clayburg, and he and I rode up on the train together. It was my first train trip outside of the boundaries of Texas.
the center of Lyndon Johnson's Texas is Johnson City, population 611. It was founded in 1879 by James Polk Johnson, an ancestor of Lyndon Johnson. It lies 14 miles east of the LBJ Ranch on the highway from Fredericksburg to Austin. It is a western town in culture and tradition. Most of the people in Johnson City are descendants of the frontiersmen who first settled here. The domino game was going on when Lyndon Johnson was a boy. These people he has known all of his life. These are the faces of his Texas. The place to eat when he was a boy was the Casparas Cafe.
You better believe he came in here, whole gang of them. He didn't spend as much time on the streets as a lot of the others did. I know there was a boy in here the other day, I guess about Lyndon's age, Bud Sharp. He said Lyndon had a hard time getting an education. He worked on road work, worked around at odd jobs, and he felt like that was one reason he was working so hard on education now, for kids to have an easier time getting an education, because Lyndon had a hard time, but he was determined to get it.
This was the point of departure on the second day of our tour with the President.
No, there's plenty to be done in my country.
But not as much.
Mrs. Johnson shares a love of the land with the President. As we drove through the countryside, she described for us the changing seasons, the coming of spring when the hill country bursts into bloom.
It's lovely. Every shade and hue of green. There'll be all sorts of yellow flowers, many of them named after the sun, helio something, like Helianthus. And there are pink phlox and wild verbena, that sort of lavender, and the Texas star with the 5 points, and little wine cups that just myriads of them, and paintbrush. It's one of my favorites. Oh, I like the whole rainbow of them, each in its own time and own setting. I love to go on a stretch of pasture where there's one of those old stone fences that wander over hill and dale, and a herd of deer approaching. I know when I'll be getting old. It's when I'm no longer excited at this time of year. And it's exciting to see the clouds building up and growing dark before summer rain. Rain, there's the most unusual happening. Flowers just seem to spring up from the earth. And then you will suddenly come across this most delicate little bunch of ferns growing out from in the crevices, and some strange wildflowers called spiderwort. You learn to live with the seasons out here.
Mr. President, you suppose that you'll be the last president to come off the land?
I don't think so. I think that there's something about the land that is helpful and that gives you an understanding of economics, gives you an understanding of humanity, and gives you a vision, appreciation of the other countries and other civilization.
I see some lambs over here. Are there lambs?
Yes, we have good sheep and good lambs, and sheep are lambing now. We have a lot of little ones coming along.
You do this pleasure or occasionally make a little profit?
We always try to make a profit. It's not always pleasant doing so, but we work at it, and sometimes we have good years and sometimes we don't. I believe that the land is our greatest source of wealth. And a man who understands it and appreciates it would better understand democracy itself, our system of government, and all the people who live under it on the land.
I'm going to cut this off now because it does go on a little bit longer, and we're just not going to have time to see the whole thing. But before we start the tour, does anyone have any questions about what they saw?
I don't have any questions there, but I can't help but contrast his upbringing with the upbringing of our current president. They couldn't be more different.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, interesting, you know, LBJ, he really wanted to project this image that he came off the land and he was a rancher and everything, when in fact his grandfather quit ranching after his grandfather was involved in driving cattle up the Chisholm Trail to the railheads in Kansas to be shipped mostly east. And however, the president just loved this opportunity to build up this image of him being a rancher. And it really wasn't. His father was not a rancher. He was a politician, part-time politician, as well as a teacher. And when LBJ would take the drive in the famous Lincoln Continental, the 1964 Lincoln Continental, usually what was happening, however, he was in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And he was holding a styrofoam cup with Cutty Sark and soda. And the story goes that he would slow down and the vehicle with the Secret Service guys that were right behind him would come up with ice and Cutty Sark and soda and fill it up and he would continue. So, you know,
That's funny.
very colorful, very colorful.
He was known for driving pretty fast in that movie.
He was also a very fast driver, and as a matter of fact, there were a lot of people that didn't like to ride with him. And I heard people that felt very insecure. Well, the headquarters, as I mentioned, of the LBJ National Historic Park is in Johnson City, but the one part of the park that probably gets the lion's share of visitors is 14 miles east or west of Johnson City, and that's in the small town of Stonewall, which is even smaller than Johnson City. And in Stonewall, right across the river, is the LBJ Ranch. And if you look at the spelling of the river, it's actually spelled Pedernales. The locals pronounce it Pedernales. And some of the things you'll see or hear about that part of Texas, the Spanish names that are none of them are pronounced accurately. Well, let's take a virtual tour of the LBJ Ranch at this point. As I say, the little town of Stonewall, Texas was established in 1860. And as we go on the ranch, give me a couple of aerial views of the ranch. And it's very scenic, very, very attractive. Outdoor pool there.
So he purchased that, basically.
He purchased that. Yeah, that was actually not in the family. He purchased the ranch, or part of the ranch, in the early 50s and began to acquire more land and expanded it.
With his wife's money.
Pardon?
Was his wife the one that had the money?
Well, yes, initially yes, but LBJ started to make some of his own money. And here is another view, and I'll talk a little bit more about what you see is that jet aircraft there, because a part of the ranch, of course, includes an airstrip. And LBJ really was comfortable at home, much more comfortable than he was in Washington, D.C. And this is an old photo of LBJ and Lady Bird in his office at the ranch. And LBJ, you may not be able to see it, but he is howling and getting his dog, one of the several beagles that he owned throughout the years, to howl. And this youngster there, I'm going to guess, is probably Lyndon Jr., or Lyndon, who is the son of Lucy. And Lynn is an attorney in San Antonio and was the manager of the part of the ranch, the 1/3 of the ranch that was still owned by the Johnson Holding Company. And here are the buses. And the park ranger that you see in the center there, Jewel Malachek, she was a source of a lot of information for me because she was at one time the wife of Dale Malachek, who was the foreman of the LBJ Ranch. And the other two folks were good friends of ours who were volunteers also at the park. And the gentleman on the right was a retired Wisconsin state trooper. But you see, this is the bus. And actually the bus is in two parts. And it's a 61 passenger bus, so it's pretty long and a little bit unwieldy. It's one that you could not back up because of the trailer. So we're starting the tour, entering the ranch. As you can see, it's decorated for Christmas. And Christmas time was a big event because all of the family members would come to the ranch and celebrate. So if you'd gone on a tour of the ranch during Christmas holidays, it would be very special. And as was in the video, this is the school where LBJ first went to school. However, he likes to give the impression that this was his grammar school. It was not. He actually went to grammar school in Johnson City. He would wander down from the house where he was born, the reconstructed birthplace, and he would sit on the teacher's lap, but he was too young to actually start school. So, you know, LBJ once made a comment, never let the truth get in the way of telling a good story. And so you have to use that in judging what he's saying at the moment. And the interior that you saw in the video of that Junction School. How many people can say that they own the property on which the first school that you went to? Pretty unusual. And this is the reconstructed birthplace. And so we call it his birthplace. However, the house that you see there was reconstructed in the early 60s because the old house was torn down in the 50s. But LBJ, when he had this vision that he wanted to basically donate 2/3 of the LBJ Ranch to the American public to be used as a national park, had this in mind. Well, this reconstruction is pretty accurate, and it's got this breezeway, and he was bragging that it was the coolest place on the ranch. It has a breezeway through there oriented north and south so that some of the winds would come through there and cool, because the temperatures in the park, or in that part of the country, they're pretty high in the summer, and also the...
Think Phoenix.
Pardon?
Think Phoenix when you say this.
Like Phoenix?
But the humidity is very high, so it's very uncomfortable. Consequently, Carol and I did our doseting, our volunteer, during the winter months, which was much better. And right across the road on the tour, and I apologize, this is a little bit blurry, but this is the unveiling of Lady Bird's headstone. This is the headstone of the president. She passed away in 2007. And this is youngest duty Lucy and her husband, Ian Turpin. And right here is Linda, as well as her husband, former Senator and Governor Chuck Robb. You may recall them. And this was quite a scene. And this was one of the stops on the tour, and no one was allowed to actually go into the cemetery for obvious reasons. But this is the Johnson family cemetery. And the two headstones, a little closer version. One of the, LBJ could be very gross. One of the things when someone was visiting and he was bragging about, well, this is where I'm going to be born, and he actually urinated on that site in front, you know, that was LBJ. Just up the road, continuing on the tour, is the house of the grandparents. And this is where his grandparents, Sam Ely Johnson Sr. and his wife lived until their death. However, that's not a stop on the tour because the structures are in really bad shape. One of the interesting things about the LBJ Ranch is the only working cattle ranch in the National Park System. And the animals that you see here are direct descendants, bloodline descendants of the original LBJ herd. And those animals, complete with the LBJ on the horns. And these are horned Herefords. They're not the polled Herefords that we see these days. And they're also a shorter and stockier animal, because that's what we were wanting in those days, well-marbled beef for its flavor and its tenderness. Oh, and here I am with our good friend, and this was Christmas Day on the ranch. And as you might guess, the park rangers and the ranch hands that worked for the park were off on Christmas Day. However, the volunteers were still working, so we're feeding some of the youngsters here. And then the next stop is the LBJ Ranch House. Now, the original part of the house is this built out of stone, and they subsequently added the rest of the house later on. And there were a whole bunch of extensions and add-ons. This was LBJ's bedroom, and on the back side behind it, on the north side of the house, was Lady Bird's bedroom. They did have separate bedrooms. And this is the view as the bus pulled up. People would get a view of the ranch, and it's pretty spectacular with the live oak trees there. There's some magnificent, those live oaks, I love them. And we would proceed to go ahead and explain and describe a little bit to the visitors what the ranch house was like. And frequently, Lady Bird lived in the house most weekends and was there during the Christmas holidays. And so consequently, we had to go through Secret Service gates. This part of the ranch was controlled. That's why they had bus tours at that time, because this was Lady Bird's her residence on weekends, as I said. And if you were really lucky on a weekend or during the holidays, the Christmas holidays, she would actually come out and wave to the visitors. That was pretty special, and that was the #1 attraction, of course, on the tours. And one of the things the Park Service occasionally would set up, the chairs on the front of the lawn, just showing that so much of the business of the country was conducted here at the ranch. As a matter of fact, at that point, Lyndon Johnson spent more time away from the White House than any other previous president, and probably since, with maybe one exception, our current president. But he was a workaholic, and he didn't know what a vacation was. Whenever he came to the ranch, he was working. So he frequently, if not usually, had heads of state, members of his cabinet, his staff, members of Congress, and other very important people coming to visit and taking that infamous tour of the ranch in one of the Continentals. And this is the living room at the ranch, and I'll point out that LBJ had the triple TVs, which he also had in the Oval Office. Actually, they were not in the Oval Office, they were in the little lounge outside of the Oval Office. He was obsessed with what the news media was saying about him. Kind of like our current president. Although if our current president wanted to listen to all the channels, news channels available, you'd have to have dozens of TVs, right?
So each one was one of the networks, right?
Each one was one of the
ABC, NBC, CBS.
Exactly. And here is an example. This is one of the many Continental convertibles that he had. Beautiful automobile. And this is on display right behind the ranch house. And this is what was called the underwater crossing that you saw in the video. And a little different view, you can see where it would be pretty shocking if you took someone down there. However, that's not done anymore, as you can see. And we definitely didn't do that in the buses. And here's a very interesting automobile, an Amphicar. Kind of a blurry photo. This is a little bit blurry photo. I go back to the previous one. If you look very carefully, it's kind of hard to see, but there are a couple of propellers back there. And it's truly an amphibious car. And LBJ was, well, he loved to shock visitors. And he never went into the river, however, because the river just wasn't deep enough. But on a lake to the north of Johnson City, he would frequently just drive right into the lake with an unsuspecting person, and there was one individual who was about ready to jump out of the car on one of those trips. And, you know, that doesn't look very stable to me.
Get rid of the gun in her back.
Yeah, a little bit too little freeboard there.
Those things are worth about $100,000 today.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, man,
Yeah.
I believe it. Well, one of the interesting things is when I was doing bus tours, I made a recommendation that, you know, the most common Air Force One airplane that ever landed here was the Jetstar that you see in this photo. But we didn't have it at the ranch at that time. But I knew they had several Jetstars at the boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, just out of Tucson. And I made a recommendation. I said, you know what we really need is to have one of the Jetstars restored and on display. Well, I don't think it was because of my recommendation, but here is one that was painted. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful airplane. But this was the most common Air Force One that ever landed at the ranch. Now, you have to keep in mind that any fixed-wing aircraft that the President of the United States is on is called Air Force One, regardless of the size. And this was essentially the smallest one because it could go into smaller airports. However, the airstrip that runs north and south was originally put in, it was only about 5,000 feet long, and then it was extended during the presidential years to the 6,200 feet that it is today. And interestingly, it's still identified formally as the Johnson City Airport because it was put in with federal taxpayer funds on private property, the ranch. You know, there was a little criticism about that. Well, this is kind of typical as you tour the ranch, although this is not on the bus, this is just in the back of a pickup. And one of the other stop was the show barn. And this actually was constructed during the Johnson years, the presidential years. And it's the center of the working part of the cattle ranch. And it's really interesting. It has a drive-through feature because LBJ actually wanted to be able to drive right through in one of those Continental convertibles and show off all of his prize animals. And here you see is a park ranger in a kind of a casual pose. But we would stop there, and right now you can actually a drive onto the ranch. After Lady Bird passed away in 2007, they opened the ranch up so you could drive. Otherwise, the only accessibility for visitors was via our bus trips. And it was pretty interesting to stop here because we would typically have some of the animals on displays in the little pens that you see there. I remember one time I was actually doing the interpretation here, and we didn't do that very often. Usually it was just the driver that did interpretation. But it was a big weekend, and I can't remember why. Maybe it was during Christmas. And here was one of the cows and a 3-week-old calf, one of the beautiful registered Herefords that was pure white, where the white was. Hadn't been altered with the red soil of the area. And this one little boy came over, and the calf was afraid. It was at the opposite end. So I picked up this calf, looked over at the mother, and I walked the calf over so the boy could pet it. And watching the mother, even with the bulls that were on display in there, it was not a problem. They were pretty docile. Oh, and here we are feeding. The animals were really pampered in getting the actual best feed possible. And here's one of the bulls. Here's one of the LBJ bulls. You see, pretty good size, but you notice that his legs are a little bit shorter than the animals that you see now. Also a little bit heavier.
Yeah, stocky.
That's what is that, Mary Kay, 50s?
Yeah.
50s Hereford?
Yeah, actually 50s and 60s Hereford. And those animals, and here I am feeding some of the youngsters on there, and the animals are sold at auction, and sometimes they come at a pretty good price, because if the buyer is looking for the well-marbled beef, that's what he or she will get. And this is an operating cattle ranch. The number of head of Herefords that we had on the ranch while we were there ranged anywhere from 110 to 120 or so, and it varied a little bit. Oh, and if we were a little bit late in feeding them out with here's a walkthrough, a feeding station. That's just simply because the cattle were a little bit impatient before the ranch hands went out.
Dick, are they still maintaining that same breeding today? Or?
Yes, they are. They are. And one of the highlights for the volunteers each winter was Lady Bird Johnson's way of saying thank you to the volunteers on the ranch, that even the park rangers and the permanent staff didn't get an invitation to the ranch house for dinner. And so here's an opportunity for Carol and I, that guy with the dark hair, you may not recognize him, but Lady Bird was such a gracious person, and when you were speaking with her, she was acting like you were the most important person in her life at that point. Very impressive lady. And here was a sit-down dinner, and neither Carol or I are at the table with Lady Bird. We're at one of the other tables. But this dining room was very historic because heads of state, very important people, dined in this area. So it was very special to go out there and have dinner with Lady Bird. Oh, this is our home at the ranch. There were 4 RV sites at the back part of the ranch, and the only other 2 people that actually lived on the ranch other than the 4 volunteers at these RV sites were Lady Bird and Gail Malachek's widow, Jewel, that I pointed out to you. And that's Carol and our dog. And of course, on a day off, we have to celebrate. And right behind over here, where the fence is, just the other side of the fence, is the north end of the airstrip. And that airstrip was actually pretty steep as it went to the north. And I had the opportunity of going to a presentation by General James Cross, who was retired at that time. He was LBJ's pilot, Air Force pilot for Air Force One when he was a colonel. LBJ liked him so well that he actually made him his military advisor, military attaché. And General Cross was telling the story that only one time did a DC-9, at that time the largest airplane that ever landed at the LBJ Ranch, but in order to take off, you had to take off uphill, and he had to unload everybody out of the plane, and only LBJ got to ride on the airplane because it was overweight.
Wow.
Oh, and we continue with the celebrations on off-duty hours, and the gentleman you see here was the current ranch foreman. And this is a very nice photo that was taken in the living room of Lady Bird. That was many years ago. And to the east was Johnson City, which was LBJ's boyhood home. And this house is really where the family lived for so many years. And so consequently, this is where he went and graduated from high school. This is also where he made a lot of contacts in the town. And here's a photo during the presidential years of the whole family. And you can see this is Lucy Baines Johnson, the youngest daughter, and Linda Bird Johnson, who was the oldest daughter. And one of the interesting things, and I never could quite understand, I heard a lot of explanations why LBJ for Lyndon Baines Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, LBJ, Lucy Baines Johnson, and Linda Bird Johnson, and even one of the Beagles, Little Beagle Johnson. And this was the Johnson treatment. And LBJ, 6'4", was very influential, and this was very typical of how he would get his way. I love that photo. But he can also be very crude. And here he is showing his scar from a recent surgery that he had. And this was on national television. And people began to wonder, what is this guy all about? And here he caught a lot of flack with the news media when he held out the beagle by its ears. He did some pretty strange things. We're talking about some of the things that he accomplished. He accomplished so much during his presidential years. You need to understand that he's the only president that served as a congressman, a senator, and a vice president before he became president. The only man. The Great Society, he gave a speech in 1964 to the University of Michigan graduating class, and that's where he introduced the Great Society, which was, in my mind, an incredible speech. You may recall part of that. But some of the accomplishments through that was major civil rights acts in 64 and 65, the Economic Opportunity Act in 64, 2 education acts in 65. Actually, he was responsible for over 60 different bills that he signed ultimately into acts as president regarding education. Probably the most significant was the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. He created the Job Corps, as well as Operation Head Start, and VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, Medicaid and Medicare. And one of the ironies of Lyndon Johnson, he died just months before he would have been entitled to either Medicare or Social Security. He did not live until his 61st birthday. There were a lot of people that complained that many of his anti-poverty programs were ineffective and costly. And that, of course, is a debatable subject. This is, I think, probably one of the best descriptions of Lyndon Johnson from John Connally, who was not only the governor of Texas, but also a U.S. senator. There is no adjective to describe Lyndon. He was cruel and kind, generous and greedy, sensitive and insensitive, crafty and naive, ruthless and thoughtful, simple in many ways, yet extremely complex, caring and totally uncaring. He could overwhelm people with kindness and turn around and be cruel and petty towards these same people. And that, I think, is Lyndon Johnson. There was one story that was told, and I had to confirm this because you have to understand, conducting bus tours and doing interpretation of Lyndon Johnson, we were not told by the park that you had to sanitize your version of what you told the visitors. All they asked was be accurate and tell the truth as much as possible. Or you could tell stories, controversial stories, just put a certain perspective on that. So there were many stories that I told. One of the stories that I told occasionally was Lyndon Johnson personally called a tractor dealership in Fredericksburg, a little town about 15 miles west of the LBJ Ranch, and said, we need a new tractor. And he knew the owner of the dealership. And he said, send 2 of your best tractors down, and gave him some of the specifications. And so we can evaluate which one is the best. Well, guess what happened? He never returned those 2 tractors. Another story was LBJ was going on telling a story in the context that I just mentioned just a few minutes ago. And Lady Bird was standing at his side with LBJ's boot, one of the boots firmly implanted in a cow pie. Lady Bird kind of nudged him and said, Lyndon, that's what she called him, Lyndon, why don't you wrap up the story? You're beginning to dissolve.
So Dick, where did he graduate from college?
From Southwest Texas State Teachers College in San Marcos, which is now Southwest Texas State University.
And then he taught school for how long?
He taught school for about a little over a year in southern Texas, and most of the kids in his class were Hispanic.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what he did for minorities was really kind of surprising to a lot of people, because there was a great deal of discrimination in those days against anyone who was not white. And however, for many reasons, and a lot of people explain that that was probably his experience teaching these kids in southern Texas, South Texas.
Yeah, that's credited with a lot of his, the whole civil rights thing and all of that, that school teaching juncture is mentioned oftentimes.
Yeah.
For
you know, even though he accomplished more than so many presidents, either before or since, and there was good reason for that. He knew how Capitol Hill worked. He was a master politician. And as president, he knew exactly what he needed to do to get the Congress to pass the legislation that he wanted. So he was so influential, probably more than any other president ever. However, a lot of times what he did was pretty ruthless in his approach to politics.
Thank you very much, Dick.
One more. I know that San Simeon, even though it's publicly owned, the Hearst family still has special privileges there if any of the Hearsts want to go. I wonder if the Johnson family has any special privileges at the park.
Very good question. And yes, the stipulation when LBJ basically donated this, and the daughters, the 2 daughters, didn't know that he did this at the time, donated 2/3 of the LBJ Ranch to the American public to be used as a national park. One of the stipulations that Mrs. Johnson, as we called her, not Lady Bird, was entitled to live in the ranch for the rest of her life. After that, then the ranch house would then come to the American people. But with the provision that the family members can still visit and basically kind of take over the ranch during holidays and special occasions, which they still do. To my knowledge, they still do. They were doing that, of course, when Mrs. Johnson was there.
Sure.
I can remember once I pulled up on one tour at the ranch house, and here were all of these dresses laid out on blankets on the front lawn. And here was this woman over there, and she turned around, and it was eldest daughter Linda Bird. And she looked up, saw the bus. Of course, she heard the bus. She came over, and I announced who that was, because if you were to have seen her, you wouldn't necessarily recognize her. She didn't have any makeup on, and, well, we won't go beyond that. People went crazy. And so she came over to the bus, and we were not allowed to open the bus because of Secret Service protection for Lady Bird. And she asked me to open the door. I opened the door, and I gave her my headset, the microphone, and she got on the bus, started talking with people and explaining that she was going through all of her old dresses during the presidency that were in storage in the attic.
Oh.
And here they were all scattered out on the front lawn. Pretty interesting.
That's good.
John?
I was wondering if you ever got any sense of how the Johnsons felt about the Kennedys, because of course Kennedy and Johnson were rivals, and then they were also, you know, on the same ticket, and they served in the same administration. But the talk from the Kennedy side was always that they didn't have a lot of closeness or even necessarily a lot of mutual respect, especially the Kennedys kind of feeling like Johnson was a bit of a hick, and you know, it wasn't in the same league as Kennedy and his entourage. And I wondered if, was there resentment on the part of the Johnsons, or did you pick up on that?
Absolute resentment. However, it went two ways too, because Johnson was looking at this upstart president who had little political background, and Johnson was the master of politics in Washington, D.C. And so the two perceptions were very different. And after, one of the ironies is Johnson stipulated, I'll mention one thing, very interesting. Johnson was one president who had more recordings than any other president. LBJ was the one who convinced Richard Nixon to record all of the conversations. The irony there.
They were both very suspicious people, I think.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Johnson had holes drilled in the table in the meeting room where he would meet with his cabinet members, and so he could record everything. And pretty much every meeting was recorded. He had it in the Oval Office, his little lounge off the Oval Office, in the big, the meeting room where he met with his cabinet members, and at the LBJ Ranch. And so he stipulated, however, before his death, when he left the presidency, here are all of the tapes that were never transcribed or anything. And he stipulated, when he established the library at the University of Texas in Austin, that they not be released for 50 years. However, after the assassination of Kennedy, the Warren Commission basically wanted to hear some of those tapes and basically convinced the powers to be to release some of those tapes. And then at that point, the library decided they're going to go ahead and release the tapes gradually. And so over the years, one of those tapes is a fascinating series of tapes after the assassination of LBJ. JFK. LBJ is on the phone with Jackie Kennedy and flirting with her. So obviously, he was really attracted to women. You may have heard that, and it was very true. And he had this attraction for Jackie Kennedy. To listen to those tapes is actually incredible. One of the things that Carol did is you transcribed, I think, didn't you transcribe none of those
No, I
things?
had to listen to all of them, and then, because they didn't have written permission to use those tapes, period. So I had to call everyone who was interviewed and send them a release that they had to sign and send back. Ooh. There were several that, people that I talked to that were not pleasant.
They didn't want the
Ooh,
blankety
no.
blanket.
Right,
Did they even know they were recorded at that point?
Oh, they knew they were recorded.
Yeah.
And one was a vet, one was Linda Bird. They were, yeah.
But Carol was told,
And I got
the
trouble.
only members of the park that are allowed to speak directly with Johnson family members is the superintendent of the park, period.
Yeah.
With one exception, very close friends of the family for years. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Did Bill Moyer's name come up at all, or was he persona non grata when he broke with?
Oh, no.